welcome to Two Boomer Women. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. I've been talking with Boomer women for almost a decade now. Well, I guess I've been talking to Boomer women all my adult life. Reinventing myself several times along the way, though, but always focused on us, Boomer women. With this incarnation of Two Boomer Women, I'll be interviewing other women who have a message of interest for our demographic. If you want to hear about or learn about something specific, let me know and I'll find someone who understands us to talk about it. There's a contact page at twoboomerwomen.com. If you want to be a guest on Two Boomer Women, bring it on. There's an application form at the website too. Finally, this show is all about conversation. We women know its value. We know how to do it, and we must perpetuate the art form. So let's get started with today's show. Welcome to the Two Boomer Women podcast. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. The structure of families these days is as varied as the houses they live in. Combine the state of affairs in the world today with the love that dwells in the hearts of so many parents and wishing to be parents, and those variations multiply. As grandparents, we work to ensure the love between us and our grandchildren doesn't change as divorce becomes increasingly common. We open our hearts as our children remarry, and we welcome ready-made grandchildren into our lives. And more often, we welcome a new grandchild that not only is culturally not similar, but may not even speak a language we know, as our children opt for international adoptions. Sometimes these children have experienced trauma in their short lives that we can't even imagine, and sometimes the facts of past trauma aren't even known. We're grandparents. We're full of love. But how do we greet and manage and love these children in the best way possible, the best way for them? How do we help them become part of a family that they don't know, they may not look like, that eat different foods, have different practices? It really is complex. My guest today is an international adoption mom. That was over 20 years ago, so over time she's figured it out. And she's going to talk to us today to help us understand what we can do to be the best possible grandparents we can be in these situations. Maria DiDio, you're welcome to the Two Boomer Women podcast. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Maria, perhaps the best place to start is at the beginning. Why did you and your husband decide on an international adoption, and why Mexico?
Well, we first chose adoption because we wanted a sibling for our daughter. So we had a biological child. And then as the years went by, it was clear that we were not able to add to our family naturally, and wanted to reach out. And we explored many adoption alternatives. In the U.S., it was particularly difficult. And we just by happenstance heard of this connection to an agency that dealt with many orphanages in Mexico and applied there. And we're assured, because by that time we were looking for an older child. Our daughter was 7, soon to be 8. And so we thought, why not pursue an older child through international adoption?
What sort of preparation went into that process? Like, was it just a matter of applying, or did you have to go through legal channels?
Yeah, the international process differs for every country, and we had been through many other agencies. So we had been meeting with therapists, working with social workers, read books, went to training sessions, and we were because we had been down the adoption road before. But yes, it was a lot of preparation just because of our own interest, and because the agency encouraged us to reach out to others who had adopted from Mexico and internationally. And then we knew other families that had adopted internationally. So that was all part of a network that really helped us quite a bit.
Oh, that's good networks. And just knowing that you're not the first person to go down a road is really helpful. So what were the first, you got your daughter, obviously.
Yes, she was 7.
Okay, I take it wasn't a walk in the park. What were some of the first issues that arose for your daughter? And I guess what were some of the first issues that arose for you and your husband?
Well, the realization dawned pretty quickly that she was not happy. I mean, when you hear the word orphanage, maybe some things come to mind, but in Mexico, the orphanage where she lived was a very loving place. The women that took care of the children were called tias, and our daughter was particularly close to one of them, the director of the orphanage. And it was a series of different orphanages with children in residence at different ages. And it was just a place full of love and fun. And well, can you imagine, though, it was in Cuernavaca, Mexico. I'm not sure if you're familiar. It's a lovely kind of vacation spot outside of Mexico City. And so, she lived with about 30 or so children there. And there was a swimming pool. And again, the environment was really wonderful. And then, so she was there. And then the next day she woke up in suburban Philadelphia. So, I mean, just that transition at the time, I don't think I really appreciated that. And it was just a matter of language was really the first issue, and just her just tremendous loss. I mean, adoption begins with separation and loss, and she experienced that 2 times over, like a double sort of whammy, that she was in the orphanage and then separated from the women that had cared for her for many years.
It's interesting because I think so many of us, when we think about international adoption, orphanages, we do think that, and I'm not trying to be that person, but it's almost like we are rescuing the child. We're giving them a loving home, that sort of thing. But then when you realize they're taking them out of a loving, caring situation that's quite nice, and I'm sorry, the difference between...
Right.
I was going to say the difference between Mexico and Philadelphia would be pretty climate alone.
Yes, exactly. And just everything culturally, what she was used to doing and eating, and her routine, and, and your friends would feed into that, of course. Oh, isn't she lucky? She's so lucky that she has such a wonderful family like you to care for. And maybe that's true, but we didn't do it to win a prize or anything, but we were hoping to, grow our family. And she was just not having it. And that process took many years. And I don't think that I really was aware of that. And that's the reason that I really started journaling our experience and writing about it, and just giving others the opportunity to think about what a big transition, what a traumatic transition this really is.
With it being a big transition, a traumatic transition, I can see it would take a lot of time, a lot of energy. How about your older daughter?
There was just so much resistance initially, and obviously the language barrier, that it really took some time. I would say honestly now that they're still not close. I mean, they're 2 so completely different personalities that, and I can talk a little bit about what we did to kind of encourage them to get together. But it was, they went to the same elementary school, and then they went to different high schools. So in a way that was almost good. They had the opportunity to kind of be their own person. Now they live on separate coasts. So the struggles continue, but I'm ever hopeful.
Now, I'm coming at it from a grandparent angle. Throughout the struggles, and it sounded like it took a little time, if we, the grandparents, are usually included in family life, how involved do we get with this? Like, are we just a buffer? Are we just a sounding board? Can we try to provide some grandparent type love? Like where do grandparents fit into, especially if it's a struggle?
Well, let me just say this, that grandparents were something. Now, I mentioned the loving environment at the orphanage. And in my daughter's mind and experience, that equated to mother. Mm-hmm. But in the orphanage setting, just think about it, there are no grandparents. So I can just tell you and your listeners that there's no more fun and wonderful experience than seeing your child just discover that there's such a thing as grandparents. My daughter when she just would follow my mother around the house and just say, Grammy, Grammy, Grammy. And she just loved to say the words. It was just really fascinating. So the grandparents represent just kind of another way to get close to the family that I was kind of surprised. I thought, well, how's this going to work out? But it was really wonderful. My mother, the other grandchildren were a little older, and this was a chance to be a grandmother all over again. And the first girl, the other grandchildren were boys. So it was really terrific. So I would encourage grandparents to get involved, read stories, just be there, go to dance recitals. That's what we tried to do, just be inclusive.
Good. And sorry, some of these questions are really personal, and you're welcome to say you don't want to answer them. But I'm just thinking that, your elder daughter, was she a little possessive about grandma?
Yes and no, but shared pretty easily. That was now she had been an only child for 8 years, so that was a bigger transition. It's just the whole sharing concept. But at the end of the day, it was so much better for her and for the family. So that I was glad for that.
Yes, I could see actually that. You could, a grandmother, for example, grandparent, could be someone special to each child in a different way. So, when you're, whatever, your birth daughter, whatever, I don't know what the phrase is, but when she needed just a little bit of her own time, the grandparents could step in there, and then they were a novelty. Abu was a novelty to your adoptive daughter. What other issues arose for the family as time went by? I mean, I realize that you reached a stage where you had 2 teenage daughters, which may have been a whole nother adventure. But were there any other, how long for the language to kick in and stuff like that?
The language, it was interesting with regard to the language, because we were very sensitive to the fact that she had lost her language and lost her cultural touchstone. So we tried to encourage her to retain her Spanish. And at one point she said to us, why did you adopt me if you didn't speak Spanish? And so she was mourning that loss. It was another loss, which was unfortunate. So we hired tutors. We tried to encourage the use of the Spanish, but without someone in everyday conversation, it was hard. So when school kicked in, I think it was then by that point middle school and then high school, of course, where the Spanish language was a requirement, I saw like a little spark reignited, and much of it came back pretty quickly. And that, I think, just helped her confidence, helped her with a little bit more of a realization of who she is. A lot adopted children, I think, she was just, she looked different and always sounded a little different. And when she got that Spanish back, it was a real, as I said, boost for her and her identity.
Well, and I'm sure, too, she would quickly become one of the better Spanish speakers in her class, which would really help her, whether it's her self-esteem or whatever, but just know,
exactly.
I got this. Good. I'm going to ask you a question that you're welcome to plead the fifth on. Now that the girls are adults and everything has worked out in its own way, in those really dark hours, was there ever a time when you questioned your decision?
Oh, yes.
You don't have to answer that.
You're thinking, not question in terms of, I don't want to do this anymore, but just, okay, center and what are we after as a family? And we never lost sight of the family. And the journey is just so funny, because there were, dark times too. And I would encourage parents, grandparents to rely on professionals that help through these difficult transitions. But she is just a funny, spunky, hilarious kid that, again, personality is so different from my other daughter. So we had many family experiences where we would kind of celebrate the two differences and really enjoy them. So it's, as you said, it's many years later and we have come through it, but really take the time to celebrate each child individually, and then those moments as a family.
I'm really glad to be speaking with you sort of 20 years later, because if anybody's going through it right now, whether as a parent or a grandparent, it's just like, oh, good. Like I've got a few tips now, and in the long run, we all survive the journey.
It does last a long time now. If these, and as I said, adoption begins with trauma and loss, and those testing behaviors that the children who have experienced trauma, they lasted, I'll say well into college. I mean, it's really was, there were some difficult moments, and we always just try to not lose sight of who we were as a family.
That might be a good lead into this next question. I was going to ask if I could ask some personal questions, but I guess the last one was pretty personal. But may I ask some personal?
Sure.
Okay. You were married. You already had your birth daughter, as you say, 8 years as a single child. I take it you had a career. How did all the trials affect those relationships?
Yes, it was. It is a very good question, and I often look back at because we're married 31 years at this point, and we had a very successful divide and conquer philosophy and plan, I guess is what you could say. We just found that we were each better at certain things with the children, and very naturally focused on those things, and it kind of, so we both didn't have to do everything. My husband worked geographically close to home, and so could do, pickups at school and maybe a doctor's appointment, and then as the years went on, actually the later years, I did work partly from home. And so it was just a matter of all kinds of mixing and matching. So, but it really made us stronger as a couple. We talked over everything. We're unified on a lot of decisions. And as I said, they went to the same elementary school. So, they did Girl Scouts together and dance class. And so we did. And then as they began to form their own personalities and went their separate ways in high school, we carved out the time for them. So it was a little bit of everything. I'm not sure that was the best answer, but that's what we came up with.
Well, what I'm hearing is conversation. And or communication, like between you and your husband especially. But also, I've got 3 children that I birthed all 3 of them, and, enough other children in my life that once they get a little bit older, and as you say, get into middle school and high school, those personalities do really define themselves, and you go with the flow. Somebody's into soccer, the other person's into swimming, or, whatever. So,
you try and support what you can. Encourage a full, because we were always preparing them for college, preparing them for the next step, and doing the best you could for that.
So once again, what I'm hearing, and I just want to verify, is that because children, as they grow into young adults, they become their own person. The fact of adoption almost drifts into the background, because they are now 2 individual young adults. And the fact that one was adopted doesn't change the fact that she has her own interests and her own hobbies and all the rest of it, her own friends. It's
well, and what you're saying is true, but because our daughter's heritage remained so important for us as a family, we stayed in touch with the women in Mexico. And as it turns out, our biological daughter had a chance to work at one of the orphanages when she was in college. And we went back and had a visit and were reunited with the women that cared for our younger daughter. So it was really super emotional. And through the years, and that was quite a few years ago. And then since then, we've kept in touch, and she did my younger adopted daughter did her own study abroad and visited in Mexico and visited with her caregivers. So
what a nice continuum. I mean, from both sides of it, your daughter still has that origin story, but those women who loved her for, 6-7 years also know that everything was fine in the end, and she did have another loving family and that sort of thing. So that's great. Now, I'm just going to go back for a moment to when you're in the thick of things. You mentioned having professionals around. Did you have any other coping strategies besides communication with your husband?
We had a network of other parents that had adopted that we kind of stayed in touch with, and the professionals through the years changed. One was specialized in play therapy and helping younger children, and then teenage years brings a whole different set of questions and anxieties and things. So we transitioned to another therapist that specialized in that. And so, and just try to encourage them both to do what they loved to do in their spare time. And athletics were important for both girls. And so the strategy was really kind of mixed and varied, but consistent in that we tried to develop their personalities.
I'm going to go sideways for a moment just because you talked about the other families and just get your opinion. I'm going to hit you sideways with this. I know a number of families who have embarked on international adoptions. One family adopted 2 children from the same country, albeit 6 years apart, so they weren't related, but they at least had the same physical attributes. Another family adopted 2 siblings together internationally. And a third family that I'm aware of adopted 3 children over about 6 years, but each one of them was from a different country.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on that, sort of like all the 3 different scenarios?
Well, my goodness, since I've been, since writing my memoir and now the children's book, I've been just diving into all sorts of scenarios with families. In writing the book, I was working with a woman who had adopted, I want to say 8 children, and from different countries, not all 8 from different countries, but a combination. And I just marvel at the resilience, the parenting skill set, the bravery. It's a lot to have on your plate, of course, because I think, as I mentioned, our daughter's heritage was so very important. And so just to know where that child comes from and know what's needed in that child's life, takes time to unravel. And who knows, with a large family, there's the support of the other children. So I give them a lot of credit.
I'm just thinking too, with 6 or 8 children from a variety of countries, dinner hours must have been pretty interesting if you try to maintain some of the food choices.
Yes.
That'd be great. I want to be a grandparent to that family. Another question that you're welcome to plead the fifth on. I know what the Fifth Amendment is. I've heard that, and there's no tactful way to put this, that a lot of palms need to be greased en route to international adoptions. Do you know anything about the prevalence of that?
Just what I've read. For our particular situation, we had a super competent attorney that took care of the legal side, and then we had an agency in the U.S. that had been doing it for years. So the fees and whatnot were pretty much set. I mean, that said, international adoption is very costly, but I have read subsequent to our efforts, I've read that adoptions in certain countries were questioned because children, there's a process that happens, I know internationally, where a child must be declared an orphan, that there are no parents that will support this child. And that sometimes includes, in our case, it included advertising in the local paper, making sure that no one was, seeking to parent this child. So, but what I have read subsequent to our adopting is that in certain countries, some children were portrayed as orphans when they in fact were not. And that, as you said, money traded hands for whatever reason. And then children even arrived in the United States with the adoptive families discovering that there were biological parents in the child's native country. So that does happen. I think, there are laws in place now to safeguard those things, but we were very fortunate in our case that it was very well managed.
Wow. Yeah. The stories I've heard is like once the adoptive parents are on the ground in the other country, there just seems to be hands coming out saying, yeah, you can get through here after, I see something in my palm. Anyways, that's a whole nother subject.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're an author now. When did you start writing? And was that therapy, or did you just hope to prepare other families for this when their adventure began?
Yeah, good question. So when we were going through it, I started just to journal the experience because I thought it was just so darn interesting. Like, oh my goodness, look at this, and how different my as you said, the anticipation of what an orphanage would look like, who the caregivers were, what her life was like. We visited the orphanage twice. And anyway, I just started to journal all of our experiences because so much was happening. My older daughter's reactions and her anxieties. But then after the adoption was complete and we started living and going through various experiences, I kept writing, and I decided to write a memoir about the entire experience. Not quite sure what I was going to do with it. So that process took about 10 years. So it took quite a while for me to kind of formulate it into a story. And I worked with an editor at one point when I thought I had a first draft. And she said to me, if you're just writing to just say what happened, or perhaps for your own therapy, that's really not going to help people. You really need to be as brutally honest as you can about your feelings at the time, why you did certain things, how it affected your marriage, So I began to rewrite the whole thing with just a more honest and open look, and really, really examined just everything. And so that was really the memoir. So then a few years passed. The memoir was published in 2019, and it's called Love at the Border, meant to convey, of course, our child from Mexico, but also just a little bit of a statement there on, her love for us, again, could only go so far for so many years. I mean, it really took a long time for us to evolve as a family. And thinking upon that, I thought, well, the best vehicle for those discussions are children's books. I mean, what better way for an adoptive parent to acknowledge behaviors, encourage behaviors, and then ultimately, does love win out? Maybe. But then I'm writing a series of books focusing on adopted children, foster children, blended families, where some of the the first book is inspired by true events, as I think I mentioned. So it's really a vehicle for the parent-child discussions to see what behaviors are out there, acknowledge them, and try and get through.
And I can see how that would be so helpful, because when you're in the midst of it, I'm sure it can be a lonely place, or it can feel like a lonely place.
Yes.
Okay, let's go back to our audience now for just a moment. What sort of advice would you give adoptive parents or grandparents? Is there anything that sort of we haven't talked about?
Well, in terms of parenting and grandparenting, I think it's a matter of just meeting the child where she is or he is, meeting the child at their needs. And it's not going to be, there's a phrase, instant family, and it's, yes, you're a family, but it does take time it did take time for our daughter to adapt, to, recover from the trauma and loss of separation, not only from her birth mom, but from the environment and her cultural environment. So it really is, it does take time and thoughtful interaction, if I can say that together.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I use the word communication, and thoughtful interaction is exactly that, like communication on every level.
Because you're not going to understand everything they're thinking and feeling. So I'll just give you an example. My second book is called How I Wonder Where You Are. And it's about the same girl. Her name's Carla, and she's adopted from Colombia. And she's thinking of her birth mom. Now, she was raised in an orphanage, but she's now in a family with a sister that kind of looks like the parents. And she's thinking, I don't look like them. Who do I look like? How do I fit in? what does my birth mom ever think about me? So those thoughts, I think should be encouraged. It's natural to think about, your roots, your culture, your genetics, and those things should be encouraged and allow children to grow from there.
And I've heard the exact same thing about not international, so domestic adoption. The children, they do wonder. Now, you offer services, don't you, around?
Yes. Well, for my books, I participate in, obviously, podcasts and virtual book discussions. I also have an email address for questions, and I am looking for nuggets of wisdom for any grandparents with experience or things that you might have suggestions for to be included in future books. I've done quite a bit of pro bono adoption consulting just to be another ear for parents that might need someone else to talk to. I'm not a therapist, but I have done adoption coaching. And as I said, I'm really excited about writing these books and reaching out to parents who are looking to have conversations and transition with making a family.
Yeah, isn't that just, I love that term, just making a family, no matter what it looks like.
Right.
There's so many variations on that theme that, yeah. Okay, after a little bit of a Zoom glitch there, Anna Marie, I appreciate your patience. We were talking about your children's books, and the question that came to mind was, have you had children read them, like adoptive children? Do they ever say, that's me, or, just get excited because somebody understands?
Okay, so just Secondhand Information is, because it's so new, it was just launched within the last month, and I've had several friends give the books as gifts, and the feedback was that there was, smiles around some recognized behaviors, and the story was touching, and they loved it. So it was, in answer to your question, good feedback, and some of the behavior portrayed was very accurate.
Oh, that's good. Well, yeah, it would have to be accurate. You lived it. Oh my goodness. Okay, so where do people find you online? I want to start there.
Website is AMDIDIO. That's AMDIDIO.com. And then the books are for sale currently. It will be expanding, but currently on Amazon. So just search my name, Anna Maria DiDio, and the book should come right up.
Okay, yes, the links to the book was the important part. So, and I always put links in the show notes. Now, before we wrap, I want to end on a positive note. Could you tell us about your family today? Now, you've mentioned that the girls aren't super, super close, but how about yours and your husband's relationships with each of them, I guess? And because I think that the story has ended pretty happily.
Yes. Yeah. So as these personalities have evolved, our time with our daughters has evolved. And for example, the older daughter, our biological child, and my husband are very connected through sports. And I'm a big sports person, but they do the brackets for the NCAAs. They do a football pool. She does a fantasy football, and she's very into numbers. She's a very good mathematician and statistician, and she loves poring over all the stats for the various teams. And so that's something they kind of do together, and they both have that math science link. And then I do different things. Now she lives on the West Coast, so we trade recipes and we visit whenever we can. And so then my younger daughter works in the nonprofit world, and I'm very connected to that. And, she lives locally, so we have a lot of shared activities. And now this summer, for the first time, we're trying to arrange a vacation. With COVID has kind of put a damper on a lot of travel, but we're trying to arrange to all go away together. And so it's really evolved, and quite nicely. They've both become just incredible, wonderful women, and doing their own thing. And I'm just so proud of them.
That was a note I wanted to end on because, we talked a lot about the trials and the challenges. in your about section, you said you were the mother of two wonderful women. And I really thought we should wrap on the fact that it did work out in the end. It did work out in the end, even if the operative word there is work. Listeners, if you or anyone in your life is considering or in the midst of an international adoption, I really recommend you check out Anna Maria's books and learn from her experiences. Oh my goodness, thank goodness for people like you that, forge the path and then tell people about it. And if you know people that are going into international adoption, make sure you share this episode with them. If you have comments on today's show, you can leave them where you're listening, and we can be found at Apple or Stitcher or TuneIn. Most places a person would listen to podcasts. Of course, there's always the website, twoboomerwomen.com. To leave your comments, click the Join the Conversation tab. Leave stars and reviews as they help us grow. And before you go, hit the subscribe or follow button, and you'll be notified about future interviews with more of my great guests. If you want to be a guest on the podcast or know someone who would, there's an application form at the website too. Anna Maria DiDio, thank you so much for being my guest on Two Boomer Women today and sharing what could have, I'm sure were at the time really the lows. And then thank you for helping me end on the highs, the pluses of family.
Thank you. I enjoyed your questions very much, and thank you so much for having me.
That's great. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.